And that way we utilize its microphone, which I think you're hearing pretty well. Correct?
Sure. Yep.
All right, great. Let me go ahead and kick off, and then I'll give it over to you, and I'll move the slides for you like we talked about.
Okay, it sounds great.
All right. Well, welcome to number 2. And I'm glad I could be here. Last week was a little bit under the weather, but I'm feeling much better now. It was a great beginning last week with Hillary, I thought, and we're going to equally enjoy Patrick Prill tonight. Now, let me give you a little information on Patrick. Patrick earned an MA in theology and an MA in church history from Gordon Cornwell Theological Seminary. But he did this all in his spare time because his full-time career over many years was in the financial services industry. So he's got a BBA in economics and management consulting, and that's been his career. And then part-time, he studied theology and apologetics. Now, most recently, Patrick has written this book, Things Atheists Say. And he's also been really kind to us tonight to give us some copies of this book. And I want each of you to have this copy, but I'm going to require 2 intelligent questions of Patrick tonight to get your copy of his book. Okay, I think that's easily done.
You're setting a high bar.
Setting a high bar. And then I also have a giveaway of Darwin's Black Box, written by Michael Behe. This is a seminal book in regards to intelligent design and thinking through the dilemmas faced within the evolutionary materialistic worldview. And we'll give this away to whoever asks the most intelligent questions, okay? So we're really proud and pleased to have Patrick with us tonight. And we've got a couple people on Zoom as well. So thank you for joining us. Patrick, let me start with a prayer, then I'm going to turn it over to you, okay?
Sounds good.
All right. Heavenly Father, you're so good to us. And as St. Peter said in his first epistle, you're always providing us opportunities to share our faith and to defend the faith that we have in you. And with those opportunities, though, Lord, we know that education and we know that learning comes along with that. And we're excited tonight that you've brought Patrick to us. We ask you to bless his ministry, bless his time tonight. Bring the Holy Spirit to us, Lord, to open our ears and to open our minds as well to what he has to teach us. Lord, we ask all of this in your Son, Jesus' name. Amen. All right, Patrick, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Well, it's a pleasure to join you this evening. Robert and I spoke a few days ago about possible topics, and he conveyed that you're going to be having some speakers in the next week or 2, and that you're going to be exploring the topic of pursuing justice. So we thought it might be a good idea to just kind of lay some background information so that when you guys dig into that topic, you'll have kind of a frame of reference. And to start off, I thought it would be important to try to cover 3 things. The first is worldviews on campus, and that will be the next slide. The thing that you'll notice on a college campus is, in many ways, it is, I guess, representative of the country, but in many ways it is not. And the thing that you'll find is that there's a little bit of skewing in perspectives. So for example, the average person in America, roughly 90 to 93% actually believe in God. Only about 3 or 4% would call themselves atheists. When you look at college graduates, that number is about 89% that believe in God or some higher spiritual power. That's according to Pew Research. However, your professors don't really match those numbers. About 75% of undergraduate professors believe in God or a higher power, and 10% call themselves atheists. That's about 3 times the national average. So what you'll find is that the perspectives of your professors while somewhat representative of the nation, are skewed more toward a non-believing perspective. So when you try to have a conversation about important matters, justice, morality, any variety of topics, a worldview is really important. You need to know where the other person is coming from. And so on a college campus, you will normally find, a heavy group of people that subscribe to naturalism. That's a universe without God. And within that group of people, I call it kind of the three major lanes of the naturalism highway. People who view the world through the eyes of matter, through the eyes of biology, and through the eyes of people. Then you have theists, ourselves. You have people believe in God, but don't believe that God is active, deists. There's not as many of those. You have some that are naturalistic pantheists. Okay, that would be people like Quentin Smith, a philosophy professor. And then you actually have more polytheists on campus, especially people coming from Eastern Asian countries. So when you talk about justice, you need to know where people are coming from. So let's take a look at the first worldview just as an example. And I'm going to use a university professor as representative of this view, and that's Alex Rosenberg. He is a philosophy professor at Duke University. He was the head of the philosophy department. And when you start talking about a worldview actually encompasses many things. So as an example, your view of personhood, who is a person? Your view of value, your view of rights, purpose, volition, morality, and ethics. And there's a variety of other topics. What is your perspective of truth? What's your perspective of consciousness? What's your perspective on the source of knowledge? So all of these things are a part of a worldview. Now, Alex Rosenberg's worldview is fairly representative of what you would call this first lane of naturalism. And he views the world through the eyes of matter. So I'm going to give you a few quotes from his book, The Atheist Guide to Reality, just as a few examples. So when it comes to personhood, he says that people are just lumps of matter. There's no soul, no self, no person. You have no first person point of view. That's just an illusion of your consciousness. So you don't really have an individual identity. In terms of value, he says that absolutely nothing has intrinsic value. When it comes to rights, he says there are no natural rights, rights one has just by virtue of being human. To put it crudely, lumps of matter, and that's all we are, can't have natural rights just by virtue of their composition. So to him, no one has moral rights, no one has natural rights because, gee, lumps of matter have no rights. Then when it comes to purpose, his perspective is there is none. He subscribes to the view of nihilism. When it comes to volition, your ability to make personal choices, his perspective is that basically physics and nature make you do what you do. And because of that, his perspective is there actually is no such thing as right or wrong. He says our core morality isn't true, right, correct, and neither is any other. And because of that, if someone does something what we would call wrong, his perspective is no one does wrong freely, so no one should really be punished. And his perspective is no one actually deserves punishment or reward because after all, physics makes you do what you do. Now, how do you have a conversation about justice with Mr. Rosenberg? Kind of interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, he would probably have a hard time living that way.
Well, it's interesting, he, in his book, he said, well, if there is no meaning, purpose, etc., why bother being nice? Why bother being moral? And his answer is because it makes you feel better. Not because the other person has value, not because the other person has rights, not because the other person has any purpose, meaning whatsoever. It's only because it makes you feel better. So it's a very interesting view of reality. He calls it the atheist guide to reality. Most of us would call it a very strange perspective on the world. So let's take a look at the next person. And this is someone you've heard about. You may not have read his books. Most of these quotes are from his book, Beyond Good and Evil, and his books, The Antichrist and The Twilight of the Idols. So Friedrich Nietzsche. So many of you know his story. He was the son of a Lutheran pastor. His dad died when he was about 6 years old. And he lived in the early 1900s, late 1800s. This was when scientific naturalism was booming. This is when the whole perspective of natural selection was being widely embraced. And so he had an interesting perspective of the world. And in terms of personhood, his perspective was that that basically people are a type of animal. In terms of value, his perspective was your value is based upon your capabilities. And since people don't have the same capabilities, people don't have the same value. And he actually really lamented the Christian perspective. And this is a direct quote: equality of souls before God, this falsehood, this pretext for the rancoon of all base-minded, this explosive concept which finally became revolution, modern idea, and the principle of the decline of the entire social order is Christian dynamite. So his perspective of people was basically, he said, every elevation of the type man has hitherto been the work of an aristocratic society. And so it will always be. A society believing in a long scale of gradations of rank and differences in worth among human beings, and requiring slavery in some form of another. So in Nietzsche's view, not only did people not have the same value, he saw that oppression and subjugation was not actually wrong. It helped the species. Therefore, it was good. His perspective was whatever augments the feeling of power, the will to power, power in itself in man is good. And anything that makes mankind weak is evil. So from his perspective, the species should improve. And therefore, invalids don't have the right to live. And therefore, invalids should be helped along in the process of dying. So from his perspective, the strong should survive and the weak should die, and we should help them. Now, who does this sound like? Which German leader who emerged a few years later?
Yeah,
right?
we heard Hitler here. Yeah.
So this was the perspective that was embraced by people like Ernst Haeckel and a variety of other scientists in the early 1900s in Germany. Hitler was not a particularly original thinker. All he did is embrace the ideas that were already out there, and he acted upon them. And you think, well, surely nobody subscribes to anything that looks like this perspective today. But Peter Singer, professor at Princeton, has some interesting perspectives. He has one foot in this lane of naturalism. So his perspective is human babies are not born self-aware or capable, and that's a key word, capable of grasping that they exist over time. They are not persons. Hence, their lives would seem to be no more worthy of protection than the life of a fetus. His perspective is that a healthy animal has more value than a sick human. His perspective is that a baby who has been born, okay, after the baby has been born, the parent should have the right to kill that baby up to 28 days after it's been born, not before it was born, after, if they don't like the baby's capabilities. Therefore, your value is only based upon whether someone wants you, not because you have intrinsic value. So how do you talk about justice to a person like Friedrich Nietzsche, or even a probably less extreme version, Peter Singer? How would they view justice? How would they view to whom justice is owed?
Strong survive.
Right.
Mhm.
People who have, capabilities. If you are self-aware over time, you have the right to live. If you're not self-aware over time, so what does that say about people who have Alzheimer's?
Yeah.
If that, according to that definition, they have no right to live. What
Yeah.
about people who are in comas? According to that definition, they have no right to live. So it's a very, very slippery slope. And so when you're talking about justice, if you are owed justice only based upon your capabilities, that's a very dangerous worldview indeed. Let's look at the third lane real quickly. Now, people realized that the first two types of naturalism were pretty scary. The first type basically ascribed you no value, no worth, no rights. The second one gave you value, worth, and rights only based upon your capabilities. So they said, wow, this is really pretty frightening. And they looked at, what happened during World War II, and they said, oh my goodness, we need to come up with a different perspective. So this is the third major lane of the naturalism highway, looking at the world through humanism. Now, this is either called atheistic humanism or naturalistic humanism. There's a lot of different names for it. But basically, it's the view that people are sophisticated animals. We're just at the top of the food chain. Okay. Their view is, and this is according to Paul Kurtz, who was the author of the Humanist Manifesto 2000. People have equal value basically because we say they do, not because they in fact have value, but because we want them to have value. In terms of purpose, there is none, but hey, guys, you can go out and invent your own. In terms of volition, well, determinism is really strong, but we actually do make choices. So at least they get out of the, you're a robot perspective. And then when it comes to morality, they say, well, the survival of mankind requires morality. But the interesting thing is they say that moral principles change over time. And that while ethics should be principle-based, there's no set of principles. So on the one hand, Paul Kurtz says the dignity and the autonomy of the individual is the central value. But then on the other hand, he says, we should be prepared to modify ethical principles and values in light of current realities and future expectations. So just as a perspective or a context here, this was the Humanist Manifesto 2000. There's 140 signers. Richard Dawkins was actually one of them, interestingly. A variety of other kind of notable atheists signed it. This was the third major humanist manifesto, and all of them were different. So which humanist manifesto is the most superior manifesto? And what if someone else comes along with the new humanist manifesto? Would they be correct? And then let me ask you a question. Does 140 signers of a manifesto make something reality? What if another 140 people said, gee, we don't agree with that? What if another 140 people said, we don't agree that people should have equal rights? What if another 140 people said, no, ethics should not be principle-based, it should be outcome-based? See what I mean?
Yeah.
And then the other key challenge to this perspective, not only is there no real authority for it, not only is there no true basis for it, in fact, it's all opinion. Their perspective basically is that these ethical principles and even your value can change over time. Now, that's pretty scary. Now, let me ask you a basic question. Okay, and this is, I'll deal with the issue of value. Okay. What kind of value do you guys want? value that is high, or do you want to be lowly valued?
Most people want a high value.
Yeah, most people want to be highly valued.
You want to be highly valued, right? Okay. Do you want to be equally valued with other people or valued less than other people?
Well, I'm sure some people would say they want to be valued more, or they'd say equal to make themselves like
Let's
feel
put
better.
it like this, at least equally, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want your value to change over time? Like today you're valued and tomorrow you're not?
No,
Okay. Do you want your value to be the same no matter where you go on the planet?
yeah,
Mhm.
Okay. So I think that most people would agree with you. Most people want to be valued highly, equally, unchangingly, and universally.
Mm.
You can't find that in any of these three views of naturalism. None of these views can give you the value that you want. Inherently, they can't. The only kind of worldview that can give you the kind of value that you want is the next one. According to a Christian theistic worldview, people are not animals. People are living beings created in the image of God. According to a Christian worldview, your value is high, equal, universal, and unchanging. Do you know how high your value is according to a Christian worldview? Your value is so high, so eternal, so unchanging, and so universal that God gave his one and only Son for you. That's how he valued you. God sacrificed his human life for you. How could you get any higher value than that? So from a Christian theistic perspective, everyone on the planet is astronomically highly valued, valued almost beyond comprehension, valued equally by God everywhere, all the time, unchangingly. This is not only the kind of value that we want, it's the kind of value that is actually exceeds our wildest dreams and expectations. According to a Christian worldview, because God values you so highly, you have rights, not because of yourself, but because of the value that God ascribes to you. So you have the right to live, to meet your needs, have a family, and a whole variety of other things because God values you. There's purpose. So there's purpose of the universe and there's purpose in the universe, and you have a purpose too. And there's volition. You actually do make genuine choices within limits. I mean, you can't choose to be, 7 foot 10 inches tall if you're 5'4", right? There's limits to what real choices you have, but you have genuine volition. You're not a puppet. Okay. You're not a puppet. You're not a robot. Your life is not dictated by the laws of physics. And this is a really important concept because, and I'll get to this one a little bit more exhaustively in a minute. God loved you so much that he valued you enough to die for you. God now offers you the opportunity to value him back, to love him back. But you can only love God back if you have the genuine choice to do it. Choice is important because if there's no such thing as genuine choice, there's no such thing as genuine love. Without genuine choice, you're just a robot. You're just programmed. That's not real love. Okay. Now, when you get to morality, within a Christian theistic perspective, morality is actually attribute based. Now, most of us don't think of it that way, but it is. A lot of times you think of morality as a bunch of rules, okay? But from a Christian theistic perspective, God has moral attributes, and we're supposed to imitate God's moral attributes. And God is faithful, truthful, pure, good, loving, and just. And then when you get to how all that's applied, from a Christian theistic perspective, our laws should be based upon God's moral attributes, and they should be equally applied. So now, from this perspective, what kind of justice would you want? Would you want justice from the worldview where there is no meaning, there's no purpose, there's no rights, there's no value? Would you want your justice to come from a worldview of the strong have the right to survive and the right to subjugate the weak? Would you have your perspective of justice to be derived from a worldview that changes constantly and that's fickle? Or would you rather have your perspective of justice to be derived from a theistic perspective where your value is incredibly high, your rights are God-given, where you are accountable because you do make genuine choices, and that system of justice is based upon moral attributes that don't change? Which would you prefer?
Mhm.
See what I mean?
Easy.
Well,
Go ahead.
I would almost like taking the idea, like, if I'm a skeptic, I would retort to that by saying, well, just because I want something doesn't mean it's actually the case. So just because maybe I want to be maybe I want to function under a Christian worldview doesn't mean I think it's true. So I understand what you're saying, but I, as a skeptic, think that that's not a very honest argument when you're asking people what worldview is true, or is something that, or what worldview that they should believe in or hold,
Yeah, and up to this point, the perspective has not been to prove worldview A, B, C, or D. It's been to show how different a perspective of justice is based upon each of those worldviews.
Yeah.
And it's also been based to show that the kind of justice, the kind of value, the kind of morality that people actually want can only exist in truth if God exists. Otherwise, it's just an opinion. Otherwise, it's just a dream. Otherwise, it's just an aspiration. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I see that. Thank you.
Okay. Now let's go to the next one real quick. So now we're going to go from worldviews to morality, because when you're talking about justice, justice is just one component of morality. So now we all know that God has moral attributes, right? You read through the Psalms and they're continually talking about God's faithfulness, his truthfulness, his purity, his goodness, his justice, and his love. And collectively, those things, as well as God's just overall moral state of rightness, are called righteousness. So whenever you see those attributes listed, these are the things that the Bible calls righteousness. Now, it's interesting that all of the morality in a Judeo-Christian perspective hangs off of these attributes. So when you get to the two great commands, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself, okay? It's based upon the key attribute of love. But the thing I wanted to point about the two great commands is, what is the objective or the object of the command? It's not just you doing things, it's your relationship, right, with that other person. Morality is not just about you doing a set of 613 mitzvahs in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament. Okay. Morality is doing those things with the good of the other person in mind, with the perspective of you want to have a relationship that values that person as highly as God does. You see what I mean? So just giving a couple of examples, like there's all these 613 mitzvahs in the Old Testament, and they cover every kind of subject. They cover religious rights, property law, business law, criminal law, marriage and family, torts, health, government, courts, everything. But no matter what the subject is, all of these moral attributes are at the core of the law. So just as an example, let's take faithfulness. Faithfulness is basically seeking to keep your commitments and promises and honoring your relationship. So if you sign a contract, what should you do? Keep it. If you make a promise, what should you do? Okay. If you get married and you promise to love somebody for the rest of your life, what should you do? That's faithfulness. Truthfulness. Truthfulness is not you telling the truth. It's you seeking to tell the truth, because you don't always know the truth, right? It's to the best of your ability conveying what's true. I don't know everything, but I try to convey what I do know accurately and truthfully. And then when it comes to purity, that includes a whole bunch of things. The Bible calls it holiness. It's not defiling yourself, not defiling others, not defiling the planet. Okay. And that could be sexual defilement. It could be physical pollution. It could be any variety of things. And then you have goodness, doing things that are beneficial rather than harmful. So if I'm a company and I have products, they should actually help someone, right? Not hurt someone. They should actually, improve the quality of their lives or do something for them that they need done, not just be so that I can pillage them of their wealth, right? They need to be beneficial. And then in terms of justice, which is going to be our big topic in a few seconds, justice is about seeking to be just and pursuing justice for others. And we're going to unpack that one a lot more fully. And then love. Okay. Love is at the bottom of this because it is so foundational. Okay. And love is huge. Love includes ideas in the Bible like compassion, kindness, patience, generosity, protection, friendship, mercy, grace, and forgiveness. All the things you see in 1 Corinthians 13, plus a whole bunch more. Love is patient, love is kind, it doesn't keep score. All those things, that's love. Okay, now let's go to the next one real quick. Because again, you can't really talk about justice until you kind of get a perspective on morality. So there's 6 major moral attributes. Okay, what if I do something that is truthful, but not good or faithful? Is that moral?
No.
So for something to be moral, for your actions to be moral, can it just be one of these things, or does it need to be all 6?
All 6?
Seems like all 6.
All 6?
Well, by
right?
saying that it's not faithful, or I've already heard an example, but speaking truth with neutral morality, with neutral faithfulness, like neither faithful nor unfaithful.
Well, what I'm saying is that I can't do one and violate the others and it be moral, right? So let's say I have, a product and it's actually good, but I lie about how good it is. Is that moral?
Okay, so explicitly going counter to truthfulness.
Yeah, I'm lying.
Right.
So I'm misrepresenting my product. The product's good, but I'm saying it does gets 90 miles the gallon and it only gets 30.
Yeah, so Kyle, your point is that an action or behavior on our part may not satisfy all 6 of the principles,
So long as it doesn't violate one.
as long as it doesn't violate.
Right.
And that's how you're defining morality. Mhm.
Right. So your conduct, for it to be moral, it needs to not violate these principles. Okay. And then you look at, there's all these Old Testament examples, and I listed a bunch of them. Keep your promises, abide by your contracts, don't commit perjury, don't libel and slander. All of those explicit commands are based upon these moral principles, these moral attributes. Okay. But let me ask you this. The internet wasn't invented then. Are there only 613 ways to be moral? 613 mitzvahs in the Old Testament? Does that mean there's only 613 ways to be moral?
No.
No. So whenever I come in contact with a situation that isn't explicitly covered by one of the 613 explicit commands, what should I do?
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength.
Yeah, you do that. And then you seek to live in accordance with these moral principles. And there's another thing that, Jesus did, Jesus gave us, explicitly the 2 great commands. Jesus also said, I don't give you a new command, but I give you a new command. And the new command was, love others the way you saw me do it. So what Jesus is basically saying is, look, you think you're following 613 laws, but you can follow 613 laws. You can check the box and not give a care at all about the other person. Right? I can check the box and maybe comply with some rules, but that's not real. That's not morality that has the other person's interest and value in mind. All it is I value my own ability to keep a bunch of laws and rules. So Jesus said, do it the way I did it. Okay. So Jesus basically gave us, he affirmed the moral commandments. He affirmed the moral attributes. So like, for example, when he was confronting, I believe it's the Sadducees or the Pharisees, I can't recall which, about, tithing mint and cumin and dill and all those things. He said, yeah, you should have done that, but you overlooked the greater things: justice, faithfulness, mercy. So what Jesus is saying is these moral attributes are what everything else is hanging off of. So it's not about just following a bunch of rules. It's about your intent. It's about, are you living in accordance with these moral principles? Okay. So let me ask you this. Does Congress dictate what's moral?
No, they dictate what's allowed.
They dictate what's allowed. That's a great answer. And Cicero, I believe, he was roughly what, 1st century BC. Cicero, in his book on the laws, made the observation that Roman laws, while they dictated what was legal and what was not legal, his observation was that Roman laws weren't moral. His view was that there's a higher universal law than Roman law, that Roman law just didn't meet what was truly moral. So this is a challenge within the context of us pursuing justice. Someone will say, well, it's legal, but does that mean it's just? Not necessarily.
Mhm.
So let's go to the next one. Okay. Now, one of the real challenges with morality is that people are morally aware, but people do immoral things. So what on earth is wrong with us? And there's a long possible list. You know, sometimes we do things because of ego, pride. We think that we have more value than someone else. Sometimes we do it because we're power tripping, that we want supremacy over someone else. We want to advance ourselves. Sometimes it's just self-centeredness. We're not actually trying to hurt someone, but we're so focused on ourselves, we don't even see people around us. Sometimes it's genuine selfishness. And selfishness is satisfying your own needs with and explicitly disregarding the needs of others. And then other people are greedy. And greed is where I love things more than I value people. There's nothing wrong with having things. There's nothing wrong with possessions. Greed is when I value things more than I value people. Then you got sometimes you just lose it. You lose your temper. Sometimes you do things because, well, I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job. I'm afraid that if I don't do this, that so-and-so is going to break up with me. I'm afraid that and it's fear. Sometimes it's lust, physical desire overtakes, sometimes hormones seem to be stronger than brain cells, unfortunately. Sometimes it's covetousness. I want what somebody else has. I want their stuff more than I value them. And other times it's just foolishness. Foolishness is doing things without regard to consequences. Okay. It's also doing things knowing that there's a likelihood of a bad outcome and doing it anyway. So a lot of times people do foolish stuff. You drive 120 miles down the highway, 120 miles an hour. You have an accident, 5 people get killed because of your foolishness. So people are morally aware. We have the capability of making great moral choices, but frequently people don't because we're flawed. We're flawed. That's why we need justice. Let's go to the next page. If people did the right thing all the time, you wouldn't need a conversation about justice, would you? And so one of the problems with sort of the Enlightenment era was the Enlightenment era basically believed in the inherent goodness of mankind. Well, not so much. So even if we're not evil, we're often foolish. Even if we're not, explicitly trying to harm someone, we do things without regard to others. We do all kinds of things that are harmful to the people around us, sometimes by intent, sometimes without intent. But because other people are harmed, justice then comes to the forefront. So the first question is, what is justice? And this is the traditional Judeo-Christian Western perspective of justice. Okay. Justice has 5 major components in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And these are the major components. The first is moral conduct. And that's, treating others as though they possess value too. You're not the only one who has value. You got the golden rule, be moral, do no harm kind of perspective. I think do no harm I think that's Google's credo. And then you also have acknowledging the rights and responsibilities of yourself and others. Okay. So our country was founded on this. Our Declaration of Independence said that we're casting off this, foreign government because they're not enabling us, to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, gee, guess what? Those are actually God-given rights that you find in Scripture. There really are. God made you a living being. God gave you choices. God didn't make you, subservient to others. He made you without cause anyway. And then you do have the right to have possessions and family and these things. So justice starts off with the whole idea of moral conduct and not violating other people's basic rights. The second aspect of it is, if you do harm someone, stop. Just stop. So stop undeserved harmful actions, stop undeserved harmful laws, restrictions, stop the harm. And then restore. And restoration has a variety of different perspectives. It could be restoring someone's freedom, their property, their reputation, their position, in some cases, their health. And this idea is basically undo the damage that you did. So, like, for example, in the Old Testament, if you stole something, there were two aspects of what was supposed to happen. One was restoration and one was punishment. So if I stole something from you, unlike Babylonian law, I wasn't killed. That's kind of disproportionate to the crime. Unlike some other societies, my hand wasn't cut off. Okay, that's not really proportionate to what I did. So in the Old Testament, if I stole something from you, I had to do two things. Number one, restore what I took. And then I gave you exactly what I took in addition to that. So the first part was restoration, and the second part was enabling me to feel the harm that I did to you. You see what I mean? So that was the correction aspect. So whenever you talk about justice, there's the baseline of moral conduct, stopping harm, restoring, punishment, and reward. Those are the five key ideas that you see in the whole concept of justice. Okay. And again, it's like, depending on the society, you know, most societies kind of recognize that if a punishment is extreme, and they don't do it, but excuse me, you know, we've had in the last 100 years, some of the most extreme governments that has ever been seen on the face of the earth. You know, when you look at Nazis, when you look at what Mao did, when you look at what Stalin did, you know, and you look at the disproportionality. So these are all the components of justice. So let's go to the next page real quick. So these are some questions I have for you. Now, you can't apply justice unless you first ask, who's a person? Is a baby a person? Are disabled people persons? What about old people? Do I owe justice to any of those? Are they people? The second is, I can't offer justice to someone unless I ascertain what kind of value they have. Who should be treated well? Should I be treated differently because of my religion, because of my national origin, because of my race, because of my beliefs? Who should be punished? How should they be punished? So let's say, for example, let's say my grandfather stole something from your grandfather, and now they're both dead. My grandfather committed the crime, but should I be punished for his crime? These are big questions. How should justice be pursued? So not long ago in Atlanta, a police officer, I believe, shot someone in a Wendy's parking lot. Okay, they were evidently clearly in the wrong, but the Wendy's was burned down by a crowd. Is that justice? Did the owner of the Wendy's do anything wrong? In the city of Minneapolis, you know, with the injustices that were done there, the crowds got very, very excited. So what did they do? They went out and ransacked every pharmacy, took all the drugs out of the locked cages, ransacked the Home Depots, appliance stores, burned police cars, public buildings. burned dozens and dozens of businesses of people who had done nothing wrong. So is that justice? Do the ends justify the means? Or is that just ranting? Is that wrath? Is that rage? So also, should justice be reactive, proactive, or both? Do I wait until harm has been done, or do I pursue justice proactively? And that's one thing that government tends to not do a good job of. Government tends to wait until there's a big problem and things are out of control before they do anything, as opposed to doing things proactively. So that's a key question.
Mhm.
Another one is, who should receive restoration? So let's say, for example, that I see a couple of people in the room there. Let's say, Robert, that you stole something from one of them. Okay. Who should restore what was stolen? You or the lady that's sitting there?
I should.
Right. So what should be restored? Should they get 100 times what you took, or should they get something commensurate with what you took?
Mhm. Yeah, commensurate.
See what I mean? Now, what if something can't be restored? So let's say, for example, what if you stole something from them and then you died? What happens? Can justice always truly be done?
No,
Okay.
particularly if you take a life of somebody, right? There's no way you can restore that life.
And then who should be rewarded? So I was watching something on, the Medal of Honor winners several months ago. And I was thinking about it, these are people that did things that are just almost incomprehensibly brave to protect the lives of other people. And they were given a medal, okay, a little piece of cloth and a medal. Okay. Now, the challenge with Medal of Honor winners is about 50% of them die before they're given the medal. So how should they be rewarded? Can they be rewarded? You see the challenges here? And then when has justice really been done? So let me give you a personal example of this one. And I've shared this a couple of times. My grandmother's sister was a missionary in the Philippines, 1923 to 1943. That's back when it was really tough to be a missionary in the Philippines. She was a Baptist missionary nurse, some little island in the middle of nowhere. Okay. In 1941, the Japanese Imperial Army invaded. So for the next 2 years, they hid in the jungle. And then they were discovered. They were actually discovered on a Sunday while worshiping in a clearing in the forest. And they were brought in. There were about 10 or so of them. And I guess to be an example or something, they took each one to the top of this little hill and beheaded each one after another. And to my knowledge, the soldiers who did it had never been brought to justice. So is my family owed justice? And who would give us the justice? Did the grandchild of the person who did it, are they responsible? No, they did nothing wrong. Is the Japanese government today responsible? It's a totally different government, totally different perspective, totally different people. Are they responsible? The people who did it are dead. The people to whom it was done My grandmother's sister is dead. Her body's laying somewhere in the Philippines to this day. Okay. Can our family ever receive justice? And the answer is substantially no. And so we had a choice to make as a family, you know, and that's kind of the next page. Okay. We don't just pursue justice, right? So justice is basically, people deserve justice because people have value. That's why we want people to have justice, because God ascribes them value. But guess what? People are also loved because they have value. So let me ask you a question. Do you want justice or do you want love? So if you've done the wrong, what do you want?
So,
If you've been wronged, what do you want?
justice.
Right. So grace is when you get unearned gifts and favor, and God does that to us all the time. Mercy is an escape from the justice, the punishment that we deserve. Now, when we've been wronged, we all want mercy, right? But what if someone has wronged us? Now you have the other aspect of love, which is called forgiveness. Forgiveness is when we choose to deny ourselves justice, to show love and restore relationships. My family has chosen to forgive. I don't want to have an attitude about the people who did this thing to my grandmother's sister. I don't want to have an attitude about Japan. I don't want to have an attitude toward the Japanese people. The people who did this are long gone. It's time to forgive. My relationship with Japanese people is much more important than my perspective of my, deserved justice when I wasn't even the one harmed. Now, let me ask you this, or the last point is basically, that love is freely given. Okay. We all choose to love, but when we choose to love, it actually costs us something. Okay. It really does cost us something. Love gives, right? Love doesn't just take, love gives. Love is selfless. Love gives. It costs us something. Okay. Now the question is, as we pursue justice, do we care about relationships? Thankfully God does. Okay. Thankfully God, values relationships so much that he gave his son to pay the price for the garbage we've done because he valued his relationship with us. And the thing then in response is he offers us to love him back. But do we want that relationship? So the question that we all have then as we pursue justice is, why are we pursuing justice? Is it because we desire vengeance? Is it because we want to vent our rage? Or are we truly interested in making things right? Okay. And things do need to be made right. And are we interested in relationships? And you see some astounding stories of people whose, their child was killed. And then they go and they actually develop a relationship and they love their child's killer. And you're going, that's an almost incomprehensible kind of love to me. But the problem that I see with what's happening in the country today is people claim that they're pursuing justice, but they're not. They're not pursuing it justly. If I'm pursuing justice justly, then I care enough about innocent people that I'm not harming them. I'm not burning down their businesses. I'm not destroying their lives because I want to vent my rage. You know, and in the Bible, it says the wrath of man does not accomplish the righteousness of God. So the challenge with justice is, you know, we need justice. We need to set things right. But justice isn't about wrath. Justice isn't about rage. And one of the ultimate objectives of justice is to restore relationships. That's one of the ultimate objectives. And so as you guys kind of pursue your future conversations about justice and how to pursue it, I'm hoping that this is sort of a frame of reference that will help in the conversations. At least it'll give you things to think about. And from an apologetic standpoint, no, this doesn't prove that God exists. It doesn't prove that God doesn't exist. Okay. But as we're having conversations about people with people who come from other worldviews, it's really good to understand where they're coming from. And it's really good to step back and see how different our theistic Christian perspective actually is. And, you know, this is why when you're having conversations about abortion, that, you know, some people get really, really upset because they view that baby as a person. Other people don't. They view it as just a piece of flesh. They view it from a materialism standpoint or biological. They don't view that baby as a person, you know, and all these worldviews shape your conversation. And you have to be able to break down almost each component of it. You start with personhood, then value, then you go to rights, then you go to morality, and then you keep going down the food chain until you get to justice. But if you start the conversation with justice without knowing where they're coming from, you're going to be frustrated in the conversation. And you may never agree with them because their fundamental worldview won't allow them to.
Wow. Really like how you've pieced all this together and where you've landed, Patrick. Given us a lot to think about. If you don't mind, if we can throw some questions at you for the next few minutes. Is that
Sure.
okay?
Yeah, I may not have the right answers, but I'll try.
Let me start, and then Jonah and Daniel, Emma, Kyle, Danny Lowe's on the line as well. Jump in. One of the things that you've sparked in my mind is that I'm trying to think of Jesus, and did Jesus seek justice, or did he seek to forgive? And I'm struggling to find a time when he sought justice, either on behalf of himself or somebody else.
Well, he did. And it's both of them are in Romans. Okay. So Romans 5:8-9, God demonstrates his love in this: while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Okay. So that's God's demonstration of love. And then also it says that God demonstrated his justice because all of the sins that had been committed that had never been paid for, right? Jesus came in and died for all of the sins of the world. So Jesus demonstrated God's love and satisfied God's own justice. So Jesus came to seek and save the lost, right? But he did it out of love, but he couldn't do it until he satisfied his own justice.
Yeah. Certainly in that sense, that's the perfect worldly, never done before type of justice
Mhm.
that he took on himself. And in an earthly sense, I'm thinking about Jesus hanging on the cross, not asking for justice, but asking for forgiveness.
Right. Forgive them. Right.
For,
But he had the right to do it because he was the one being offended.
Mhm.
He was the one being harmed.
Yeah. And
And
so,
actually, as Christians, that's a really powerful principle because, you know, I've heard different people, they call this the place of intercession. Um, I think it may have been Leonard Ravenhill and a few other people who would use that kind of phrase. But bottom line is, you have a special kind of, I hesitate to call it a position of authority, but you have a special kind of appeal to God when you ask God to forgive the people who've hurt you.
Mhm. Yeah.
Because you were the one hurt and offended. Now, ultimately, God is the one hurt and offended because God is the one who ascribed you value. God is the one who, set all this in order. So no matter what, God is ultimately the one offended, right? But it's like you have this special place of being able to ask God to forgive others that have harmed you.
Mhm.
And in one case in my life, I prayed for years for someone who had harmed me for years. And it was like, and God ultimately saved them. And it was, I can't say it was because, of, this, that, or the other, but I can't help but to think that my asking God to forgive someone who had hurt me deeply didn't move God's heart.
Mhm. Yeah.
So,
Go ahead, Kyle.
yeah, I was just going to add on one way that I've seen justice defined, which I've found really helpful in putting in perspective and parsing what it means, is justice is that which brings something toward its proper end. And of course,
Set things back in order, right?
And the proper end for people is God.
Mhm.
That is, I think, one way of defining the telos of a person is unity with God in heaven. That is the proper end for every single one of us. And so justice is that which brings us closer to God. And so in some sense, that love, that mercy, despite it being in a temporal sense seeming out of whack, like forgiveness is denying ourselves that temporal justice, but it is what gets us that special favor with God, and also brings that special favor a little bit in some degree to the people that have wronged us. And so mercy, I think, is one of the most just things that we can have.
And I don't know if you guys have experienced this yet, but I worked in the financial industry for a long time in New York City, and New York's a tough place. Okay. And the financial industry is basically economic naturalism, right? And especially it's some firms more than another. And I'm not going to name the firms, but they're in the newspaper. But the thing that I found was one of the firms that I worked for, especially, was extraordinary in that even though there were high expectations of people extended each other grace. Okay. And grace is this unmerited favor. People forgave each other. People weren't vindictive. They weren't trying to destroy each other. They were on the same team. They were trying to get things accomplished. And they valued each other enough. This is one of the firms that I could call people at 2 a.m. if I needed help, and they would answer the phone.
Mhm.
Okay. Then you have another firm. Unfortunately, one of my friends worked for. It's a European bank. I'm not going to say what country. where no grace, no forgiveness. It was brutal. And it was, you look at it and you go, how would you like to work at a place where no one ever forgives? That's like hell on earth. It's horrible. And so anyway, just no matter what area you apply it, whether you apply it to, theology or just the practical going to work every day. I mean, these concepts are so valuable, and it affects everything around you. You don't want to work for a firm that has a purely naturalistic worldview of any of those three, because they'll eat you alive. They'll eat you alive.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, Emma's got a question.
So the three primary focuses for naturalism, the way you laid them out, I really like that, first of all. Like, I like the organization, but something I've noticed, and I'm sure you have too, is that people will jump around between the brackets, between what they're focused
Yes.
on. And specifically, sometimes it's in ways that are obviously contradictory, but in other times it's in more subtle, more nuanced ways that you can't really identify as easily. So it's almost like you're trying to argue against one position and then they change it. So you have to argue against a different position. And it gets really kind of muddled and confusing. But I just was wondering, like, what you thought about that. Obviously, you're agreeing in some capacity.
I
but
totally agree.
How would you have a conversation with someone when it's hard to keep track of what position they actually believe and what they're actually arguing for?
And it makes it difficult because it's sort of like an a la carte kind of perspective that people have, that they're not even consistent with their own worldview. So Peter Singer is an example of this. Okay. Philosophy professor, Princeton University. So on the one hand, he has 1 foot in the middle lane. Okay. Babies are not people, because they don't have self-awareness over time. So I should have the right to kill a baby up to 28 days because it's not a person. Okay. But he also values people. So he actually gives something like 1/3 of his income to his various charitable causes. So he has 1 foot in the middle lane and 1 foot in the third lane. Okay. But the interesting thing is, when you look at what he actually gives his money to, the two predominant causes are animal rights and abortion rights. So here's a guy who claims he values people, okay, but he values animals more than he values babies. And so, even though he kind of has 1 foot in each lane and you see the inconsistency, you can still have a conversation with him. The challenge is that he is so embedded in that view that I don't know, apart from a miracle of God, that he would ever change his perspective.
Well,
And the irony for Peter Singer is, it comes from a nice Jewish family. He should have a different perspective on what a person is. And the irony also on Alex Rosenberg, nice Jewish family. He should have a different perspective on what a person is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
well, on that note, like, I also know people who, because they don't necessarily identify with one of these clear worldviews, like from a secular or atheistic perspective, they'll say that, when you say the word worldview, for you as a Christian, just the word, just Christian itself has all these implications, but they'll almost like from the three different categories that you defined, they'll say, well, I'm none of those. I don't define myself by any of these one particular worldviews, because my worldview is more nuanced than that. I take from what I
Right.
think is right, And so I guess, like, I have trouble keeping things clear and straight in those kinds of situations. Do you have any advice for when you're having a conversation with someone who does have a kind of amalgamation of different secular or atheistic worldviews? Like, how would you speak to someone and make things clear? And
Yeah, the thing that I think would be helpful is to just kind of take several of these major things and say, well, let me ask you first. Okay. What's a person? Okay. Now let me ask you, do people have value? And on what basis do you say that they have value? Third is, okay, based upon your perspective of what a person is and value is, what kind of rights do you think people have? Okay. And then just take each one, and then you can kind of see. And the thing that will actually be helpful for them is, my guess is that they've never actually gone through that intellectual exercise. And my guess is that they have never been really in a position of crystallizing in their own minds what they believe. And in doing that, I think they'll see their own inconsistency. And then say, okay, well, you say that people have value. Well, where did they get the value?
Yeah.
What kind of value? And then I like to throw out the high, equal, unchanging, universal idea, because it truly is incredibly powerful. There truly is no way on earth that we can have that kind of value if God does not exist. It's just an aspiration. And then your opinion is no more valuable than someone else's.
Yeah.
Right. And so then all justice is just a matter of personal opinion. Right. There is no justice.
Well, and I think there'd be even some people who say, well, that's okay. I don't really care what other people think. What matters is just what I think. And then they'll go on. But I guess like the other problem with that is that other people's opinions do affect you. So,
Right.
okay, thank you.
And it's like one of the challenges that you guys are experiencing that has gotten, I believe, so much worse over the years is that kind of the pluralistic worldview, pick and choose this part and that part, and the total inconsistency without people even thinking about it. And the philosophy professors, sadly, in many cases, I just think confuse people. And I don't think they mean to, but I do think they confuse people because they don't really, in a lot of cases, have a structured approach. And so what they'll do is they'll dig into, well, this is what Hume said or Kant said or whatever. And it's like, unless you're using a structured approach to that, all you're doing is just comparing one person's opinion versus another person's opinion without any structured frame of reference. And that is really confusing.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah, it's true. Daniel, Jonah, you got any? Daniel, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a question. Like, do you think, because based off of like your family backstory thing, do you think there's like true justice in the world? And then the reason I ask that is because like usually like when certain bad things happen, like somebody kills somebody, but then they end up killing themselves. And then people like complain like, oh, he didn't get what he deserved. It's like, because to me, it's like, I mean, God's like the ultimate judge. So I was just like,
Exactly.
But yeah.
Yeah, to me, the true justice comes from God. And I have faith in that. And it's like, and I actually pray for mercy for everyone. Yeah, I pray for grace for everyone. I truly don't want anybody on the planet to get what we deserve. None of us, right? I really don't want us to get what we deserve. I want grace, I want forgiveness, but I also want to set things right because we all got to live here and other people have value too, and I want to treat them that way. But you're right, the ultimate justice in the world, is basically when the Lord comes back and, the Bible calls the great white throne judgment.
Yeah.
Jesus says, I come quickly and I bring my reward with me. And that talks about that in Isaiah too.
Yeah.
And the cool thing about Jesus's rewards are Jesus is looking for, all the good things that we've done that basically have been unrewarded that he can reward us for. Okay. And, the sad thing is no one has to have any kind of eternal punishment. No one. No one. But unfortunately, people choose to reject what's being offered them. And I look at the number of people and they have absolutely no interest in God. And some people say, well, but he didn't hear the gospel. And I say, but you know what? I've tried to talk to that person 5 times and they won't even give 2 seconds to the conversation. So while I couldn't explain truth for them, they had no interest in truth. And that's sad. And I pray for them and I pray continually for them. And the thing that I find is that over time, God softens people up, God changes their perspectives, and God gives me more chances to talk to them. But at the end of the day, ultimate justice is up to God, because we will never have perfect justice on this earth.
Yeah. Cool. Another question that comes to mind is like this idea of justice, because like the definition is like people get what they deserve. My thing is like, where do we get this idea of deserve from?
Mhm.
Like what's the standard? Like, because nowadays people are starting to get ridiculous. Like they just like want people to like just like die, basically. It's getting worse. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's nonsense. The idea of getting what you deserve, okay, again, like in the Old Testament, they had the concept of the eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And that wasn't vengeance. That was proportionality, right? I shouldn't be killed because I told a lie. There should be proportionality. And that's based upon the whole principle of do to others the way you want them to do to you. So if I'm cheating you, what is that saying? I want you to cheat me.
Yeah.
I want you to do that. If I'm doing it to you, then I want you to do it to me, because that's what God said. Treat people the way you want to be treated. Okay. So if I'm ultimately judged for what I did, God is totally just in that judgment, because I did to you what I want you to do to me. You see what I mean? I probably didn't say it right, but you get the idea?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Kyle, do you have a comment or question?
I guess I would add that I think St. Paul somewhere specifies quite clearly that the wages of sin are death, and the death that he's talking about is not even like the one that we talk about when we talk about death. So like if we're talking about what we deserve, I mean, Patrick, you said it earlier, you don't want anyone to get what they deserve.
No. And God doesn't either. And that's the thing that's crazy. God doesn't want us to have what we deserve. And yet, sad.
Jonah's got a question.
All right, I just have one question, and it goes kind of all the way back towards the beginning of the presentation. We were talking about nihilism.
Mhm.
And that's if they don't believe in right or wrong and don't believe that anyone should be punished, wouldn't that mean that they view punishment as wrong? Or how would they really view the action of punishment in terms of morality if they have that worldview?
Yeah, I'll use Alex Rosenberg as the example again. And his perspective is there is no such thing as right or wrong per se. Okay. Nothing is really right. Nothing is really wrong. He says, however, there is evolved core morality. Okay.
Mhm.
And I'm going, excuse me, there's evolved core morality, but there's no right or wrong. So what he's saying basically is we have a moral code that's not really right. It's not really wrong, but we follow it. Okay. And there's all kinds of inconsistencies with that, right? But that's basically his perspective. And then he basically says, rich people don't deserve what they've earned. Criminals don't deserve punishment because you only do what you do because the laws of physics tell you to. He's a hard determinist. And so to him, the idea of punishment and reward is nonsensical because you do what you do because of gravity and because of thermodynamics and because of,
But then again, so are the police who are throwing you in jail, just acting out the laws of physics.
Exactly. Exactly. So they're not wrong either.
Okay.
No, but and again, to have that perspective is the result is could be absolute chaos if you really truly live that way. And I think he's an interesting person because I actually talked to someone at Duke who knows him. He says he's a nice guy. Okay, so and he writes novels and he writes books, and he seems like a generally, he seems like a guy you would enjoy having a cup of coffee with, right? And you're going, he just his logical perspective just seems to be so out there, and his life doesn't even really line up with what he claims to believe. Because why does he get up in the morning and teach school? Okay, do his students not deserve a grade? Does he not give grades? Because physics tell him what to do, right? So none of his students deserve an A, a D, or an F. So why give it to them? So his act of passing in grades at the end of the semester, because he has to, are inconsistent with his beliefs. You see what I mean? It's like, if you really believe that, you can't actually live that way.
Yeah.
Because that's not the way the world works.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, Emma's got another question, Patrick. Can you stay on with us a little bit?
Sure.
This is kind of more of a thought on like the value that God gives us. I'm sure that there'd be someone who would say, okay, well, you say God gives you value, but you don't really deserve that value. Is that correct? Because under the worldview, like I guess like how I'm trying to understand like the balance between like, God gives us value, but is that value is just simply grace because, oh, God made us in his image, but then we've fallen short of the glory and therefore deserve death because the wages of sin is death. So it's like, well, do we actually have value, or do we not actually have value and God just gives it to us because he has grace?
It's always based on grace. It's always based on grace because we have nothing that didn't come from him. He took basically a bunch of dirt, right, and formed it into people. Now, whether he did that over, a 1 day period of time, like some people believe, or whether he did it over 1.5 million years, he took a bunch of elements, and that's all we are, is we're made out of exactly all the same elements that are native in the earth, right? He took it, he made people out of it in some crazy way. Okay. And we didn't deserve to exist, but he made us. And then because he made us and he liked it, he said it's good, he ascribes value to us. And the only reason we have value is it's kind of like a painter who made this incredible painting and who appreciates what he created, and he values it and he wants to protect it. Not because it's made out of canvas and a bunch of, $5 worth of paint, but because he made it. And so, someone put the comment up, that basically, our value is not based upon our merit. And that's totally true. It's like our value was ascribed to us before we ever did anything right, wrong, or otherwise.
So, yeah, I guess like I guess I would have like a hard time trying to explain that if like a skeptic were to say like, oh, like, you don't actually have value. It's only because, God, like you don't actually deserve the value that God has ascribed to you. And so therefore you don't actually deserve the rights that you're saying God gives you. So your rights or your value have to come from something else because
Okay, let me ask you this. You pick up two different rocks on the ground. Okay. One of them is totally clear and shiny. Okay. And the other one is a black lump of coal. They're both made out of carbon. Why do you choose to value one over the other?
it's just your opinion, what you like better.
It's because it's your choice to value it. It's God's choice. There's no difference in what they're made out of. One's a lump of coal, one's a lump of carbon, the other's a lump of carbon. One's just a really pretty lump of carbon. Costs several $1,000s a carat.
Thank you.
And just to add to that, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. I think from a parent's perspective, you have 3 children, and the value that you ascribe to them, if you're being a good parent that day, is equal, no matter how they behave, no matter what they do, and you continue to carry that value. Now, we do it imperfectly as human parents, but what Patrick is describing is how God can do that perfectly.
Yeah.
So even the thief on the cross, right, all the horrible things he did, and Jesus said, today you'll be with me in paradise.
Yeah.
And that may not feel like justice, but God never gave up on him. God valued him as much as anybody else. Great lesson. And who had a question? Danny? Danny, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I took my hand down because I think the speaker kind of addressed it, but I think it's important for us to understand that for us to have value is justice. From God's perspective, he is just in assigning value to us because we're made in his image. So, but we tend to look at our value more the way the world does. We did this, we did that, something that we have added to ourselves to make us valuable to the world. But that's not how God looks at us. And we need to separate that from how he grows us and how he makes changes and how he's pleased with some things we do and pleased with some things we don't do, like a parent. But we have extreme value. We have eternal value to God. And so we don't need to look at that as something that's just we have to somehow earn. We will never earn value with God. People around us don't get that. But with God,
Yeah, that's a great point, because you're right. I mean, ultimately our value is we're made in his image. You know, he chose to make us like him somehow. And that's a long conversation for a future date, but you're right. It's like, if we didn't bear his image, you know, we have no more value than an animal.
All right, we've gone a little bit over, Patrick. We really appreciate your presentation. Let's all give Patrick a round of applause. Everybody really appreciate it. And Patrick, if you're okay, I will take your presentation. I'll convert it to a PDF and share it with the group. And then other members who couldn't make it tonight, I'll share the recording as well on our private YouTube page. And we'll continue to refer to this and reflect and ponder on the thoughts that you gave us. So
Okay.
we always close up in a prayer. So I'll ask Daniel if you'll come up to the microphone and close us up.
Lord Jesus, thank you, Patrick, for bringing Patrick to us today to inform us with his knowledge that we can help share with other people. We want to thank you for giving us value in your image, and that we can share this with other people, that, you know, they're like, we all have the same value, and there's something special in that. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Man.
All right, Patrick, thank you again.
Okay, it was fun. You guys take care.
All right, you too. Thanks, everybody
Okay.
on Zoom. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
bye, Robert.
All right. See you, Danny. See Kyle. See Jeffrey.